My name is Garry Ahern, and my talk is about the Coastguard at Malahide in Portmarnock from 1822 to 1921. The historic background to this is that down the centuries, government agencies took a keen interest in the Irish coast. This interest arose from a few aspects, such as the collection of taxes, preventing smuggling, countering invasion and insurrection, and dealing with shipping and shipwrecks, and there were many shipwrecks in the days of sail. The waters bounded by Lough, Portrane, Malahide and Howth were once used by a significant volume of fishing and small merchant vessels. At Baldoyle in 1784, for instance, 78 men were working on 12 fishing vessels. In the 1800s, during the herring season, 200 to 300 fishing vessels from both sides of the Irish Sea converged on Howth. Small sailing ships brought coal and other goods to Malahide, Baldoyle and Howth. In the 1800s, at Malahide and Newport, which is a key in the northwest of the Broadmeadow estuary, vessels were discharging a total of 15,000 tonnes of coal annually. This slide just shows a map of the area with the places where the Coast Guard set up stations, and so we can see Ring from the top, we can see Portrane, Lough on the right, Malahide on the left, to the bottom right is Howth, to the left of that is Baldoyle, and then centre-wise is Robswall, which was established much later. I'll come back to that map later. From the late 18th century, customs officers were based at Malahide, Baldoyle and Howth. By 1806, defensive Martello towers, manned by artillerymen, had been built at Portrane, Donabate, Robswall, Carrickeel, Ireland's-Eye and Howth. From 1822 onwards, coastguard stations were established at Portrane, Lough, Island, Malahide, Baldoyle, Howth and Sutton. While this presentation is about the coastguard at Malahide and in Portmarnock, it should be seen as part of the wider coastguard organisation, covering both Great Britain and Ireland. In Ireland, almost 1,500 men were employed in stations around the entire coast, with over twice that number employed in Great Britain. In local communities, the Coast Guard became a significant and visible presence, bringing a degree of social impact to the parish in question. Now, this image shows the terrace of houses used by the Coast Guard in the 1800s until the early 1900s at Strand Street, or otherwise the Green, Malahide. And they were in use until around 1906. But they were demolished in the 1990s for development. These are the houses at Baldoyle, which were used by the Coast Guard, and they still remain, are now residential. Just to see another one, these are cottages at Sutton, which isn't too far away from Baldoyle, on the Dublin Bay side, which are still intact. They were used by the Coast Guard for many years. So at Malahide, the Coast Guard station was established in 1822. One of the people who came there was Daniel Stewart, who came as chief officer from Weymouth in 1829. In 1850, the Coast Guard occupied 4 houses, 2 with gardens and 2 merely with yards, backyards, in a 2-storey terrace, which we've just seen on Strand Street. The flagpole or signalling post was across the way on the green. Members of the Coast Guard availed of the adjacent ball court. What type of ball game was engaged in, I'm not too sure, whether it was handball as we know it or not. After St. James's Terrace was built in the 1840s, the chief officer lived in the end house, number 12 there. And Malahide was the centre of a district or division, so the Coast Guard stations making up Malahide division then were Nanny Water near Laytown, Balbriggan, Skerries, Rush, Portrane, Lough, Malahide and Baldoyle. For a time at least, Swords became the headquarters of the division or stroke district. The foundation of the Coast Guard, that was initially established under the Board of Customs in Britain and, well, the United Kingdom then, we were in part of it. And they used staff drawn from 3 branches of revenue: the Preventive Water Guard, Revenue Cruisers and Excise Riding Officers. Responsibilities included preventing smuggling and assistance in the discovery of illicit distilling. In 1829, a life-saving role was added. In 1831, the Coast Guard was made a reserve of the Royal Navy, and most recruits then had naval service. The ranks in the Coast Guard were boatman, commissioned boatman, chief boatman, and the station was overseen by the chief officer. In 1856, the Coast Guard was reorganised and put under Admiralty control, quote, to make better provision for defence of coasts, more ready manning of the Royal Navy in time of war or emergency, and protection of the revenue, end of quote. Emphasis was then on shipping safety, assisting vessels in distress, and signalling storm warnings to mariners. In the 1820s, James Dumbrain was appointed Inspector General of the new Coast Guard service in Ireland. In recent years, a plaque commemorating him was unveiled in Neeson Street, Dublin, where he had a townhouse, which was in addition to his country residence at Baldoyle. During the Great Famine period, Dumbrain was appointed as a Relief Commissioner. In 1846, he travelled around the coast and reported on the dire state of many people then. He subsequently took matters into his own hands, going outside official policy to help starving people in the west of Ireland. That episode was featured by Nobel laureate Seamus Heaney in his poem For the Commander of the Elite, and I suppose it's worth remembering here. It throws a different light maybe on the Coast Guard than what we'd imagine. So James, I understand, urged relief for famine victims in the Westport sector, and Aaron tart reprimand from good Whitehall. Let nations prosper by their own exertions. Who could not swim might go ahead and sink. The Coast Guard with their zeal and activity are too lavish were the words I think. That was the end of that section of his poem. Dumbrain had a country residence at Baldoyle. By coincidence or otherwise, the new Baldoyle Coastguard Station, established at Strand Road in the 1820s, was located close to Dumbrain's Park House. It is a matter for conjecture whether the Inspector General's proximity may have influenced decisions concerning the Coast Guard at Baldoyle, at nearby Howth, Portmarnock or Malahide, but it does seem likely that local Coast Guard men would have taken a keen interest in Dumbrain's coming and going at Baldoyle. Park House at Baldoyle was held by Dumbrain until about 1850. When it later became part of the new Christian Brothers site there, the house was known as St. Mary's, but in 1914 it was again renamed, this time to St. Joseph's. But the house's original name has been retained in local signage, such as Park House, which can be seen there near a modern development. And this is just from an ordnance map of the time, which shows the Coast Guard to the bottom right, station in Baldoyle. North of it, it was just above it, the Constabulary RIC station, but over to the left-hand corner is Park House, where Dumbrain had his country residence. And this image shows the plaque at Leeson Street, which was erected some years ago to commemorate Dumbrain. And it was the City Council sponsored this, and it's on houses owned by the Jesuit order. I think they still retain the houses. So concerning the local impact of the Coast Guard, stations constituted a community of up to 30 people, adding to attendances at local schools and churches. Most of them belonged to the established church, and almost all had served in the Royal Navy. The majority were English-born, and Ireland was generally not a popular posting. Coast Guards inevitably came into conflict with sections of the local population. To minimise the possibility of collusion, transfers were frequent. Their position was a transient one, somewhat at arm's length from the general population. They were seen as very much part of the establishment, and they were effectively outsiders, no matter where they were stationed. Employment in the Coast Guard was secure, mind you, and normally pensionable. Accommodation was provided, but rearing families was not easy given the frequency of transfers, remoteness from their extended families, and the many isolated locations in question. Now, this image just shows the Coast Guard in a formal parade setting in Essex, in England, with ceremonial sword and the like. And there's no reason to believe the same scene might not have been seen in Ireland around the same time. The main features of the Coast Guard station were a watchroom, telescope, a flagpole, rocket devices for life-saving, boathouse if there was a boat there, and a slipway, and also a cutter if that was part of the setup there. The cutter was an easily manoeuvrable single sailboat which could also be rowed. Accommodation was provided for married men and their families, along with limited provision for single men. Rescue equipment included shore-based rocket devices and rocket carts, such as that which has been an exhibit at Newbridge House in recent times. The rocket to which a light line was attached was fired to a vessel in trouble. A stronger line could then be pulled across and a rescue boat hauled to the vessel to bring in those on board, bring them to safety. A boatswain's chair was also used for rescue operations, conveying people in this one by one to the shore. The Coast Guard were armed. Now, I don't know exactly how long they kept firearms for, but they did have them, and they had swords, ceremonial swords certainly. They have used them otherwise in time in the past. And a little item in the Freeman's Journal in August 1863 noted that Malahide Division of Coast Guard were at ball practice yesterday at Ringsend, having received a supply of ammunition for Her Majesty's ship Ajax. So it just gives you an insight as to the ongoing life of Coast Guard. These illustrations show centre is the cart I referred to, which was not at Malahide or Portmarnock, but it was certainly in Skerries. One of these was, well, had many items of equipment, too numerous to list, and there was a list on the back of them where the officer in charge had to be sure that every item was there and in proper working order. The top left shows a boatswain's chair, which is something, the best description I can think of is a very big, strong pair of shorts into which the rescued person sat and was conveyed, hopefully safely, to the shore. Moving back to Malahide, this is a photograph from the harbour around 1900, in which the terrace of Coast Guard houses at the top right are circled in blue. The terrace of houses behind them is St James's Terrace, in which the end one nearest to the camera was used by the chief officer for some years. And in the background can be seen the hotel, which is now the Grand Hotel in Malahide. Those three vessels there give an illustration of the types of vessels plying into harbour such as Malahide at the time. Now going back to where the Coast Guard stations were established, we have seen already Lough, Portrane, and to the left Malahide, and bottom right Howth and Baldoyle, and the inlet of Baldoyle. But the centre one is Robswall, which was built in 1880, opened in 1886, and I'll come back to that in a while. This is a map from the time showing the Coast Guard station and the ball court and the signal post, which was the flagpole for signalling in Malahide, circled in orange there. Now, there was a wreck along the coast here in 1838. The Gainsborough, a 75-foot 2-masted vessel from Ipswich, was wrecked near Carrickhill Martello Tower. That's near the seafront in Portmarnock. And the incident is an example of challenges the Coast Guard faced when called to a shipwreck. That night, Chief Officer Jones with 6 men set out from Malahide for Portmarnock at 10 p.m. and a 7-man was sent to alert Captain Ross, commander of the Swords Coast Guard District or Division. Ross came to the scene on horseback soon after midnight, and in very high seas the Gainsborough was breaking up, with crewmen clinging to the rigging. Captain Ross hurried back to Malahide on his horse. With some local men, the Coast Guard cutter was placed on 2 carts lashed together, and likewise a privately owned boat. On the coastal track, there was no coast road then. The Coast Guard cutter had to be shouldered by the men for part of the way. Then Captain Ross, the Chief Officer Jones, and 5 boatmen of the Coast Guard, along with a man called Captain Begg, who was master of Malahide Coalboat, they set out towards the wreck in the cutter. And other Coast Guards were left guarding goods washed in from the wreck, which was part of their role, of course. 3 unsuccessful attempts to reach a ship on rising tide were made, but they were forced back and to wait until the tide had receded or the storm had abated. Eventually, the cutter brought 4 survivors ashore, the master, 2 seamen and a boy. 3 others had drowned, one of those while trying to swim ashore, and another from exposure while clinging to the foremast. He had stripped off to swim like his mate, and when he saw his mate drowning, he stayed on the mast, but he perished with exposure. A Freeman's Journal report on this matter was strongly contested then by Captain Ross. Captain Ross agreed with the newspaper account that local men had given unstinting assistance in the rescue operation, but he strongly denied that they had helped to safeguard the wreck and its cargo. This was not correct, Ross stated, and the Coast Guard had subsequently confiscated 3 cartloads of goods from the wreck in houses of local residents around Portmarnock area. And this was something that could happen quite often in those days when people didn't have much and wreck stuff came in on the shore. Captain Ross was later knighted for his part in the rescue, having also received the Humane Society's Silver Medal and the Royal National Shipwreck Institution, later that was the RLI, Gold Medal. Chief Officer Jones and Captain Begg, master of the coal boat, who had also assisted in the rescue, each received the RNSI Silver Medal. Now, 4 years later, in 1842, Ross had men from Malahide, Portmarnock, Baldoyle and Howth areas brought before Swords Petty Sessions. They were accused of looting 2 wrecks, the British Queen and the Globe, which had been washed up between Portmarnock and Malahide, while various goods were alleged to have been found in their possession. All charges were dismissed because of lack of evidence of ownership of the goods. So that was a happy ending for the local men who were found with these goods. Thomas Ross was Cork born, and he had joined the Royal Navy at 15 during the Peninsular War and saw service on numerous vessels before moving to the Coast Guard, where he held the position of inspecting commander from 1834 to 1843. And he was knighted in 1838, as I mentioned. For some years he lived at Millview House, which we can see here at the bottom of the image. And he played a part in the Malahide Relief Committee. He owned property in Malahide, and after his death in 1875, his estate included houses at Ross Buildings in Malahide, and his name was remembered in Ross Cottages and in Ross Terrace locally. Now, this is another building, Coast Guard Cottage, which bears that name today on the coast road between Malahide and Portmarnock. It's difficult to get any in-depth history of this, but it would, what knowledge of it is known would suggest it was used for a time by the Coast Guard. And its position is nearer to the, further out the coast, sort of nearer to the where Robswall was built later, so there's a better view from it. And there's some local anecdotal evidence that it was so used, and also it was referred to in a Dublin County Council meeting in 1910 regarding the Marine Road, that's the coast road, and there was a reference to the road running past the hotel at Malahide, skirting the coastline, on towards the old Coastguard Station, which could not have been the Robswall one, so that may have been the house in question. But the jury is out on the house itself to know exactly how long or what kind of use was made of it. Now, this is a map showing the townland of Robswall, which is one of the 10 townlands of Portmarnock civil parish. And on the right there, circled in red, is where a new Coastguard station was built in Robswall in 1885, opened in 1886. At the top of the image where the black line runs out is where the Hicks Tower, Martello Tower, but now known as Hicks Tower, is still standing there, and just north of that was the Coastguard Cottage. And on this image you can see the two locations. The original station, main station in Malahide, to the left near the railway line, you can see it in the village, did not have a view up and down the coastline, whereas the new location to the right, circled in blue, also did provide such a view, and that was opened and replaced the Malahide station in 1886. Now, as I said, unlike at Malahide, it gave a clear view of the approaches to the Malahide Inlet. But in May 1886, just before it opened, the loss nearby of a Belfast yacht, the Una, and its 5 crew brought controversy concerning the rescue operation. It also focused attention on the locations of the old and new stations. Portrane Coastguard had spotted this yacht in trouble, drifting in high seas towards Portmarnock. And an ink was heard that a man was sent to alert Malahide Coastguard, running along the shore all the way. Now, the mind boggles, but apparently this is what was reported. The assistance of a lifeboat and a tug were sought, but in vain. Chief Officer Stanley testified that Malahide Coastguard had not seen the yacht, as they had no view to the southward of Malahide Inlet. The new station would have, quote, a full view of the whole seaboard, unquote, he said. The coroner said the disaster could have been averted if the new station had been completed as planned. And the verdict of accidental drowning included a rider which stated that the jury regretted the non-completion of the new station, which could give the Coast Guard officers a view of the seaboard and would have allowed them to see the distress yacht and provide assistance. Now, a writer to a Dublin newspaper later claimed that the new station was on an extremely undesirable site. While the Una might have been sighted from there in prevailing conditions, it would have been impossible to launch a rescue boat in that area, he said. He went on to state that the original plans for the boathouse and slipway had been abandoned as the nature of the coast there posed difficulties for launching a boat. This may have been the case, but I have not been able to verify that. In any case, Robswall Station opened in October of that year, and to mark the occasion, a festival gala was held at the station. Subsequently, the station was the venue for a short series of lectures. The subject of these is not known, but they possibly dealt with marine matters and the work of the Coast Guard. At Robswall, the plans provided for a rectangular complex end onto the shoreline with an open area dividing the two flanks. Accommodation for the chief officer and 5 boatmen, along with the watch office, was in the northern section. The southern flank was to hold workshops, storerooms and toilets, and the boathouse, planned boathouse anyway, with its entrance doors facing the shore. As referred to earlier, there has been some doubt raised about the actual construction of the boathouse and boat slip. In any case, the plans included a 150-foot long slipway with wooden skids fitted, and under this the main sewer was to run. Now, there's evidence of that sewer, to my mind anyway, remaining today on the shoreline, so it seems to have been constructed. A well sunk at the rear of the boathouse supplied drinking water. Part of the stonework which surrounded the station remains visible nowadays. Now, that's just the site map as well, but these are from the plans, and you can see that the terrace of houses, it was going to be very substantially built and planned in great detail. This is part of the stonework of the perimeter wall, some of which remains today if you're going along. It can be seen on the coast road between Malahide and Portmarnock. Now, the construction at Robswall demonstrates the extent of resources being devoted to the service then and how permanent the Coast Guard was expected to be. Chief Officer Stanley had charge of the new station, and he provides an example of the frequent movements of Coast Guards and their families. Alfred Stanley, then a boatman, married Martha Dagwell, also English-born, and herself the daughter of a Coast Guard. They were married at Larne, County Antrim, in 1871. From Larne, he moved to Whitehead, also in Antrim, and then to Belmullet in Mayo. Later to County Wexford, where he became Chief Officer, and then he came to Malahide in 1886, and children were born at each location. By the 1901 census, Alfred was back in Whitehead and was by then retired. Now, this chart just gives you an idea of family life and some sadnesses that occurred in this particular family, and no doubt happened in others too. In 1872, Alfred is stationed at Larne, and his first son, Alfred, was born, and he died pretty young, as we will see. The next year, daughter Charlotte was born, and still at Whitehead in 1876, a daughter Catherine was born. 1878, they're in Belmullet, and a daughter Martha was born. In 1880, they're also at Belmullet when a daughter Frances is born. And by 1882, they're in Morris Castle, County Wexford, where he's Chief Officer. And another son is born, and he obviously, the first Alfred had died. He is named Alfred, but he died within a year, unfortunately. And in 1886, then in Malahide, another boy is born, and he is named Alfred again, the third Alfred, but luckily he was to survive to be an adult. Now, moving on to the presence of the Coast Guard at Portmarnock Point, which is at the southern end of the Borough Peninsula. If you went along the beach in Portmarnock, it's way around the corner there, as we will see from this image. It's where the red site is circled there, or the site is circled in red. Portmarnock Golf Clubhouse is there nowadays. And it's just across the tidal Baldoyle estuary from where the Baldoyle Coastguard Station was. So the presence at Portmarnock Point, This ran from at least 1850, possibly much earlier. And the Coastguard families used one or possibly two small cottages there on sandy banks. And as mentioned, it was close to but inaccessible except by boat really from Baldoyle Coastguard Station. And shipwrecks then were frequent, and this presence provided the Coastguard, you might say, boots on the ground on the Portmarnock side and along the shore northwards from there. This presence did not constitute a Coastguard station as generally understood, but nevertheless, civil and parish records often gave the addresses of families there as Coastguard Station. At an inquest in 1879, the description of substation was used by a witness. This followed the drowning of two young men who had set out from the Sutton shore on St. Patrick's Day. A strong ebb tide had carried their boat onto the Velvet Strand, towards the Velvet Strand anyway, before it overturned in high waves. And the inquest was held the next day, the day after St. Patrick's Day, 1879. Two fortunate young men, Henry Woods and Charles Todd, were the people involved. Thomas Fitzgerald, a labourer who lived on the Border Peninsula, testified he had seen a body in the breakers out at sea. First thinking it was a log of timber being tossed by the waves, he then saw it was a human body. He described how he then ran to the sub-Coastguard station on the borough and reported the matter. A Coastguard son ran down with him, and they waded out and brought in the body. A little boy, son of one of the Coastguards, deposed that he had assisted in recovering the body. Now that little boy was most probably Albert, the 8-year-old son of Coastguard Herbert Ahern, who was at Portmarnock-Point from 1877 to 1879. And in a footnote, Alfred's infant sister had died the day before the drowning tragedy, so this wasn't a good time there for them. These are just some of the people whose names I have been able to trace who were stationed at Portmarnock-Point. So Jacob Williams was there in 1850, John Ransom in 1857, John Vaughan 1865 to 66, Francis Craig 1873 to 77, Herbert Horn 1877 to 79, John Drown, an interesting name, 1879 to 80, James Henry Prigg, whom I'll come back to, 1883 to 1885, and he served at Lambay, Baldoyle, Portmarnock, Malahide, Skerries. Now, James Henry Prigg had been born in Bristol in 1852 and enlisted in the Navy like a number of others, just 15. His short Coastguard career took James and his wife, Jane, to numerous locations. In 1880, he was a Coastguard boatman on Lambay Island when their daughter, Anna Maria, was born. By 1881, he transferred to Baldoyle, where his son, William George, was born, followed in 1883 by twins, Sidney and Gertrude. A move to Portmarnock-Point followed, and their children attended Portmarnock National School on Strand Road, otherwise known as the Jemison School. In March 1884, Gertrude, aged 15 months, died from congestion of the lungs at Portmarnock-Point. In 1885, James Prigg was transferred first to Malahide and then on promotion to Skerries. In that year, the second twin, 2-year-old Sidney, died from a tumour. In March 1886, while still at Skerries, a daughter, Winifred Ann, was born. For whatever reason, a year later, James was back in Baldoyle. And following a 6-week illness, he was only 34, James H. Prigg of the Coastguard died at Baldoyle in July that year, leaving his wife and 4 children. It's a sad story. Now, on the left here of the image is the cottage known for some years as Maggie Leonard's cottage, but it was used by the Coastguard at Portmarnock-Point. Small cottage, very basic. I don't think there was even a garden with it. On the right is a larger cottage at the time. It would be much more comfortable. As you can see, there would be a 2-story upstairs in it, and it would have been a reasonably substantial smallholder on the Border Peninsula who had such a house, but the other one we'll come back to in a moment. Yes, on this image now we can see a very early clubhouse of Portmarnock Golf Club, and to the right, looking out on Baldoyle estuary, but to the right you can see where the cart is upended, the gable end and chimney and parts of the wall of the original cottage that was used by the Coastguard and which was used then for a time before they got a proper clubhouse by Portmarnock Golf Club. So this is just the location again there. There was a reference at a meeting of the County Council, I think, in in 1904, and it referred to a track running across the fields up to the old Coastguard Station, which I think was referring to that area. So the term Coastguard Station comes in again, even though it wasn't a station such as we know. Now, Malahide and Baldoyle Coastguard stations had opened in the 1820s, and some point later that substation, as we call it, was set up at Portmarnock Point, apparently under supervision of Baldoyle, and this continued until 1886 when the new station was opened at Robswall. This became the main station, superseding the station at Malahide, which was eventually closed in 1906. In 1907, an official report listed 5 locations where land had been acquired to build new stations, but which were not now to go ahead after all, and the report included Malahide as one of the 5 locations where land had been acquired and where building was not to proceed. This was 20 years after the Malahide station had been replaced by Robswall, and why a new premises at Malahide would be then needed, or whether this was a clerical error, is not evident really. It may have been a clerical error. After Robswall station had been opened in 1886, at least one house at Strand Street in Malahide had continued to be used. The divisional commander and the chief boatman were living there in 1901. Commander Grouse, who had a previous naval career and who had joined the Coast Guard in 1903, retired from Malahide in October 1909 with the rank of captain. By 1911, any use of the premises at Strand Street had been discontinued. By 1911 also, Reginald Grouse, aged 48, and described as Captain Royal Navy retired, was living comfortably in Wicklow town along with his wife, his mother-in-law and 3 live-in servants. So I presume he had a reasonable pension to support this. And these are going back to the terrace of cottages again, or houses rather, at Strand Street, Malahide. This was taken in 1995 or thereabouts when they were being demolished to make way for development. So we're coming to the end of the line locally then. During the War of Independence, the Coast Guard was perceived as part of the military establishment and targeted for attacks. Coast Guards were instructed not to fraternise with locals. Civilians were precluded from entering stations. Steel window shutters were fitted and other defensive measures taken. As 1921 went on, stations would be attacked and burned out countrywide, almost on a daily basis. In May that year, Michael Lynch, commanding officer of Fingal Brigade of the IRA, was among those summoned to a meeting in Dublin, at which Michael Collins spoke of the intended landing of a cargo of arms somewhere between Dublin and Balbriggan. He asked Lynch, possibly others also, to survey the North Dublin coast and select a spot. Lynch, as he later attested in his witness statement, he had reported back in late May that the proposed landing was impossible. This was due, he said, to the number of Coast Guard stations there. Each station was in sight of 2 others, he told Collins, and even a small boat could not land there undetected, quote, unless we destroy all the Coast Guard stations, unquote. And Collins' reply was, quote, destroy them all, unquote. On June the 18th of that year, 1921, Robswall was attacked by a raiding late in the evening, attacked by a raiding party of about 40 armed men drawn from Finglas, Santry and Kinsale areas. In his witness statement, Thomas Markey, Commandant Fingal 3rd Brigade of the IRA, described the raid, and this is possibly one of the best first-hand accounts of what happened there that we can get. Quote, when headquarters decided on destroying the Coast Guard stations along the coast between Dublin, Laytown and County Meath, I was given the task of destroying the station at Portmarnock. I had 10 men from the Finglas Company, 7 or 8 from Santry, and the whole of, or all that could be mobilised from the Kinsale Company. We carried a few rifles, and the few rifles we had, and the remainder of the party were armed with shotguns. It was expected that we would meet with resistance, as the Coast Guards were believed to be armed, although they had never been seen in public with rifles. We collected some dozen or so tins of petrol from a garage at Malahide. We actually bought the petrol there. We had no trouble in getting into the Coast Guard station and met with no resistance. The station comprised married quarters for the men, and some out offices used as stores. The different families in the houses were given a short period of time to remove any articles they required, and they, 15 of them, were then herded into a safe place. All the premises were sprinkled with petrol, and when all was clear, the place was set alight. It was totally burned out. Previous to the place being burned, we hauled down the flag flying in the flagstaff and hoisted the tricolour in its place. No arms of any nature were found in the place. This operation had to be carefully timed, as each Coast Guard station was in view of each other and could give the alarm if all were not entered at the same time. same moment. Excuse me. All our party got away back to their areas safely. End of quote. And this image now is a very hazy newspaper photograph of the Robswall Station the day after of the burning. And we can see it's a damaged remnant of the building, but we can't see much more except that there's a broken oar outside the door, there's a life belt, and there's the remains of the sign, the official sign for the station on the wall, still on the wall. I don't have access to any better photographs than that, unfortunately. Now, the day after the burning at Robswall, the Malahide-born writer Brian Inglis, then aged only 5, was at the Island golf course across the water with his grandmother and some of her golfing friends. Many years later, in his book West Britain, Inglis would describe seeing the smoke across the water, rising from the ruins of the station. While the adults, unperturbed by events of the night before, continued playing their 18 holes, the young boy was left to amuse himself with a cut-down golf club. Inglis would much later write about the event and the wider significance of what the ending of the local coastguard represented. By August 1822, all 109 stations in the new Free State had been abandoned. Most men and their families were evacuated to Britain. A claim for £10,400 sterling in compensation in respect of Robswall was made by the Admiralty against Dublin County Council. The site and the remaining buildings were then taken over by the new government and eventually disposed of to private purchasers. The coast road nowadays runs through part of the former site, and sections of the boundary wall can still be seen. These are, as you're driving towards Portmarnock from Malahide, the house to the right of the picture is on the site, which was occupied by the old coastguard. Of course, there was no roadway then. And this here on the seaward side of the road is a section of the boundary wall of the coastguard site. And to the right, top picture is Lough Island. So that's the end of my story about the coastguard in Malahide and Portmarnock. Thank you for listening.